Welcome to another edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Bubba, today's topic is one that we have unpacked, since 2021 on the program involving the pandemic. But of course, she's been involved in other things as well. But the Pfizer Papers is Naomi Wolf. She is the co-founder and CEO of dailyclout.io. This is a civic tech company. They have been able to research this. I'm talking about in great detail. Also, don't forget, she has some other best-selling works out there, including The Beauty Myth, Give Me Liberty, and The End of America. So, Naomi Wolf, welcome to Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, and I'm so happy to be joining you. Thank you so much. What an honor.
Well, what a story you are, and I think your story is incredibly intriguing because so many times, we're handed or we develop in our life, a worldview, and no matter how much evidence is presented that maybe our worldview is changing, so many times people just dig in and they won't let it go, almost like we're afraid to admit.
None of us do.
Yeah, none of us do. You're afraid to admit, you know what, maybe I didn't have all the facts. So for you, the turning point for you, even politically, don't let me put words into your mouth, but was that this pandemic revealed some things that concerned you greatly, or was it happening before then?
Well, I guess when you put it like that, two things come to mind about what you may be referring to. I certainly had a journey away from the Democrats, right? I've been a Democrat my whole life. I advised a Democratic presidential campaign and also a Democratic vice president running for president. And I was a White House spouse in a Democratic White House. And I certainly in the pandemic saw that the people I'd voted for turned out to be horrible tyrants and censors. And they censored me when I was trying to warn women accurately about damage to their fertility from the Pfizer injection. And I got kind of deplatformed and ousted from that world. And I then was privileged to meet a lot of conservatives and libertarians and independents, and a whole world of awareness opened up to me that a lot of things I believed and had thoroughly believed as a Democrat were not true. So that's one awakening. The other one is that in 2022, when a successful lawsuit by attorney Aaron Siri led to the release to the public of the Pfizer documents, 450,000 internal documents released under court order that the FDA had asked the court to keep hidden for 75 years. I convened at Steve Bannon's request a team of 3,250 doctors and scientists to read through them and to issue reports. And that's what the new book is, the Pfizer Papers, that is out right now, right here. And that's another big disenchantment because it turns out that the FDA was waving through the biggest crime against humanity in recorded history. And more investigations on our team's part found that the White House knew, Dr. Walensky knew, Dr. Fauci knew there was a massive collusion by, the very people I'd voted for in ushering in an injection about which they lied to us, that was sterilizing and disabling and killing people in massive numbers.
Let's start talking about the vaccine, and then we'll back up and talk some of the politics involved. Is it? Did you just find it strange that we rushed this in? Was the need and the panic by the public for an answer part of this that forced us to jump through so many hoops so fast and bring this to market? Because we obviously cut a lot of corners that we normally would not have done.
Right. I was hoping when I went into this project that that's what I would find, just the usual story of greedy corporations cutting corners, rushing to meet a deadline because of a, putative epidemic emergency. That's not what the Pfizer Papers reveal, unfortunately. They reveal months and months and months and months before the vaccine was rolled out, in which Pfizer was identifying many, many ways to injure, damage, and destroy the functions of the human body with, again, a special focus on reproduction. And as we say in the tech world, it's not a bug, it's a feature. they weren't, finding that the injection cured a lot of problems, but unfortunately people had strokes and placentas were damaged and lipid nanoparticles blocked ovaries and, babies were dying in utero and there was an 80% miscarriage rate. That's not what was happening. What was happening was Pfizer was showing the many kinds of damage that this injection did. And then in November of 2020, they rolled out this injection and they concluded that it didn't work to stop COVID. Their words are failure of efficacy and vaccine failure. And in fact, the third most common side effect in the Pfizer documents is COVID. So they knew it didn't work, except it was working to hurt and disable and destroy and kill people. And 1,225 people died in just 3 months in the Pfizer documents. So, I wish I could say, oh, they were rushing to get this, thing they believed could help to market, but that's not what the documents show. They show an in-depth study of how to damage, especially the reproductive system. And now we're looking at, which is weird, right? Because COVID is supposed to be a respiratory illness, but there's almost nothing in the Pfizer documents on lungs or oxygen levels or mucous membranes. It centers on weird sexual stuff, about how to disrupt and destroy conception and hurt babies. That's what it centers on.
And what is the end game there? Does this come from, and we've talked about this on the show before, when you start hearing, very powerful people saying that we have a population problem, the world is overpopulated, we're going to run out of resources, which these things are not true. Is this come from that worldview?
Yeah. What was the reasoning?
What was the reasoning behind this?
Well, unfortunately, the Pfizer papers are purely technical. They're scientific, right? So you'll have what, to me as a journalist, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a journalist, is an incredibly suggestive document. Like Pfizer sent an 8-page quote pregnancy and lactation report in April 20th, 2021 to the White House. And it showed that 2 babies died in utero of maternal exposure to the vaccine. And it had charts showing horrific damage to women's menstrual cycles, like 15,000 women bleeding every day, 10,000 women bleeding twice a month, 7,500 women not bleeding at all, meaning totally infertile, 10-year-old girls bleeding upon being injected, 85-year-old women bleeding, horrible hemorrhaging. And, they sent that along. They sent proof that babies were a chart of babies getting sick and 1 baby dying from nursing from vaccinated moms. But there isn't a memo saying, look, we are successfully destroying human reproduction. However, as a journalist, you look at this 8-page document, scientifically recording horrific destabilizing damage to female reproduction, to babies, deaths of babies, ruination of women as fertile people. It goes to the White House. And then 3 days later, Dr. Walensky gives a White House press conference saying to the women of America, there's no bad time to get your COVID vaccine before you get pregnant, during your pregnancy, or after your baby is born. And she has this document in her hands, right? So, you can conclude what you want to conclude. The bottom line is we have a 13 to 20% drop in live births now in the West. The serious adverse events, especially reproductive, are concentrated in North America first and then Western Europe. And you have this massive replacement of these injured and sterilized populations by people who are not being forced to take this injection, and who come from countries that don't have any tradition of being a free republic or human rights or the Constitution. And to me, it's obvious that this is a policy, right? It's a depopulation policy. Because I've been an advisor to a presidential campaign and a vice president, and no one gets away with poisoning and killing the American people unless it's a policy from the top, because you'd be burning up too much political capital if it wasn't an intentional policy. Right. So that's my conclusion. And I also did independent research showing that this injection was produced in a memorandum of understanding with the Chinese Communist Party, with Fosun Pharmaceuticals, which is the biggest pharmaceutical, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in China. And the SEC filing for this injection shows that the IP, the intellectual property in the vaccine, went to China in 2021, not to a Chinese individual or a Chinese company. The SEC filing says to China. Then China produced 1 billion doses, not for internal use. They used something else internally for export. Then they opened 14 manufacturing plants in Western Europe and 11 in the United States. So 2021 on, if you got a Pfizer injection, you're getting something manufactured, produced, formulated, distributed by our existential enemy. And as my husband, whose career has been in intelligence, points out, China wants our farmland, they want our energy grid, they want our water resources, they want our food supplies, they want our ports, they don't want our population.
Yeah, that's kind of the sad part of the prize, isn't it?
More with Naomi Wolf when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues right after this. So let's talk about Blaze Media. Shop blazemedia.com now more than ever. I mean, got the big Trump victory. Looks like there's going to be, advantages in the House and the Senate. There's a lot to celebrate right now, and let the world see. By going to shopblazemedia.com. Check out all the cool stuff available and use our promo code BLAZE10 because you get 10% off the entire order. That's shopblazemedia.com with the promo code BLAZE10 for 10% off. Check out the jackets, the T-shirts, the mugs, the flags, and a whole lot more by going to shopblazemedia.com. Use the promo code BLAZE10.
So let me ask you this. We always like to go back to classification point A. And it looks clear to us with what we know now that Dr. Fauci knew good and well we were doing gain-of-function research, and I know he says we wasn't, but just he's doing that on a technical term of how far they did the gain-of-function. We were doing that at a lab in Wuhan, but yet he came out and tried to sell us on the market and somebody ate a bat and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he clearly knew what we were doing. He knew that his group had invested money in that. And do you hold him responsible for a lot of this?
I mean, it's a great question. He certainly knew, and he lied under oath to Congress, which is a felony. But I guess what I'm trying to do very carefully is just stick to the evidence. He's not copied on the Pfizer Papers.
Right.
He is, however, very serious crime. One of our lawyers, we also have 250 volunteer lawyers, FOIA, meaning Freedom of Information Act, emails with the word myocarditis from the CDC. And I think there was a whistleblower who responded to the FOIA because we got an unbelievable tranche of documents. And Dr. Walensky was directly on the email chain. Dr. Fauci was directly on the email chain. 15 White House staffers were on the email chain. And there's a template raising the comms up to POTUS, which is President of the United States. And I know what that means as a former political consultant. It means that the president can see this communication if he wants to, but there's deniability, right? You can't prove he saw it. So in this email chain, all these people, including Dr. Fauci and the head of HHS, are responding to the fact that the Israeli Ministry of Health and a pediatricians organization came to them and warned them, April of 2021, that the injection was causing heart damage to minors, healthy young adults and teenagers. Instead of telling the American people, stop right away, especially because they knew that it didn't stop COVID, right? Stop right away, don't risk your healthy child, your healthy young adult. What this communications shows is a freak out at the highest levels where all these people convened to produce a 17-page script, which is completely redacted, but which they used, and you recall what they said after that, to reassure the parents of America that myocarditis was extremely rare and that it was mild and that it was transient. And all of that was a lie. And now you have our kids dying in sleep, dropping dead on athletic fields, college students dying. And they knew. and Dr. Fauci certainly was on that chain, was part of that communication. So that's a big, big crime that I know he committed from the evidence.
Well, there's so much irony in the Pfizer papers and what you're reporting, because one of the tools they used, propaganda tools, and I remember people saying this to our faces, to my wife and me. We did not take the vaccine. Mm-hmm. And they would tell us that we were evil, that we were mean, we don't care about other people, we're endangering other people. And
the pandemic of the unvaccinated. That was the quote I loved.
We all got demonized and vilified. And here you are with evidence that it actually was quite the opposite. The vaccine itself is what was most likely to kill people, not those of us that didn't get vaccinated.
Yeah. I mean, well, that we haven't even talked about that, but one of the bombshells in the Pfizer papers is that Pfizer illegally hid the deaths of 8 vaccinated people who died with COVID. And they did so that they could falsely claim that you're more likely to be hospitalized and die if you're unvaccinated with COVID. If they had done the math correctly, which they're obligated to by law, they would have had to tell the FDA, and the FDA would have had to tell everyone else that you're more likely to die with COVID or be hospitalized if you're vaccinated, which is what all the data now show. But they literally hid the bodies and didn't report those deaths in order to get the emergency use authorization.
So back to the motive. Is it depopulate? What am I trying to say? Is it to stop the birth rates? Do you think that was the ultimate goal in some of this?
And China ultimately is behind this because of what your husband has reminded you, that the resources they love, the population they don't. Is that the motive?
Well, it's more. So now I'm going beyond the Pfizer papers. To
Understood.
My own.
Okay.
And I went into detail about this in my 2 books, The Bodies of Others and Facing the Beast. It's clear, and a lot of good journalism by independent reporters has dug into this nexus, that this effort, right, which was worldwide, was a nexus of very evil people and organizations. The World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab issued, the script for the lockdowns and the Great Reset, right? It was heads of state on script in democracies and non-democracies around the world complying with this. It was HHS, creating a whole superstructure up and down the hierarchy, all the way down to your local town council or your local school board, HHS put board members on churches and synagogues to keep them closed during lockdowns, and then to cheer a vaccine effort. And quote unquote overcome vaccine hesitancy. So a lot of people colluded in this. But, again, there is no memo saying why, but I do keep putting the pieces together. And so do people like Catherine Austin Fitts and Ed Dowd. 2 things. One is that China and the World Economic Forum, the globalists, right? They do have a script, and you can see it with this massive illegal immigration in Western Europe and the United States and Canada. And I'm the daughter and granddaughter of legal immigrants, so nothing against legal immigration, of course. But, the script is, let's get rid of Western Europe and North America culturally because they're annoying. If you want a global quasi-Marxist totalitarian oligarchy, which is the best language I can come up with for what they want, you do have to get rid of the United States and Western Europe because we're the last stubborn, countries that keep insisting on, the rule of law and freedom of speech, and which, by the way, has been the biggest wrench in the gears of these evildoers' plans, is freedom of speech in this country. So my understanding is, these people just had a plan that involved the ascendancy of this nexus, Bill Gates, of course, and the weakening or kind of emasculation of North America and Western Europe, especially the United States. And China has said by 2049 they want to be the world superpower, that they want to, not have to deal with the United States. But also a lot of bills are coming due. Ed Dowd and many sophisticated economists keep talking about how unsustainable the fiat money economy is, that there's going to be a collapse. And in Western Europe and in North America, boomers are retiring, it's my understanding that the promises that were made to that generation and to the elderly can't be met, right?
You mean the Ponzi scheme?
Right, the Ponzi scheme, exactly. Yeah. So they were euthanizing the elderly, in Northern Europe, according to Dr. McCullough, and they're euthanizing people in Canada. And the way they took out the elderly in the pandemic with remdesivir, that swath of Social Security payments didn't have to get paid, right? And if you just dial down the birth rate going forward and again replace those kids with the children of people who don't remember democracy, you're going to have, what America is turning into right now, a compliant, fearful workforce that will work for half the amount that American workers would work for, who are, disoriented, who don't have deep roots in the community, who can't resist whatever, race toward totalitarianism we could see was being put in place in the Biden regime. I mean, where I live in New York State, Governor Hochul kept trying to open quarantine camps. One woman, a lawyer named Bobby Ann Cox, kept stopping her, but she really, she had the regulations, they passed them in Washington State. These are real. They have them in Australia. People are locked up for 2 weeks. They have them in China. These are real. So that's my understanding of what these people, were aiming at, a broken, injured, deep weakened America, where people are what we're doing right now, we're so preoccupied with deaths and illnesses that we can barely focus on protecting our homeland. If there's, an invasion from Cuba, where China now is positioning, a base. I mean, it's pretty smart.
We'll continue our conversation with Naomi Wolf when this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues.
This is the Rick and Bubba Show. Watch more at blazetv.com/Rick and Bubba. Rick and Bubba, Rick and Bubba.
They did such a good job, unfortunately, and I still see it today. I still see it. People with masks on, people still willing to go out and get the vaccine that's available.
Oh, they're still advertising
right now,
yeah.
and they're still pushing it. And I'm like, a lot of these things have been debunked, but the propaganda was done so well, as you just pointed out, Naomi. Fear. Boy, you can get people to do a lot of things if you can scare them. It still exists in our society, unfortunately, more than you would think.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we haven't even talked about the billions that went to the media for overcoming vaccine hesitancy, 55 million to the BBC alone. NPR took the money, The Nation took the money, the New York Times took the money. The CARES Act sent $1 billion to influencers and little community groups and churches and synagogues, as I mentioned, and news outlets, all for everyone to get on board with the propaganda. And yeah, to this day, people, we've kind of broken through, but it took 2.5 years. But I was just walking outside and I ran into a mom who said, oh, she's taking her 2-year-old to get a flu shot. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and they're putting mRNA in the flu shots, like nothing. Right. When people read the Pfizer papers, it's not just the Pfizer injection. Right now, I try to do everything possible to not put myself in the hands of Big Pharma or big medicine ever for any reason, because unless I'm literally at death's door from, got like something that needs an antibiotic, but nothing like the Pfizer paper shows that the FDA just waves through that. Right. Nothing is safe, yeah. Right? You can't take their word for anything now. You have to do your own thinking and your own research.
Which has been one of the worst things. Bubba and I both talked about it. I've always been so trusting of our medical field, and that's been compromised. Like you talked about, Naomi, there's so many. The way I look at going to the doctor now is completely changed.
I know we're about out of time. Can you talk briefly about your change in your political beliefs based on some of the things you experienced during this?
Sure. I still think of myself as a classical liberal. I don't identify as a conservative, even though a lot of my views overlap with conservatives. I think that's true of many Americans. This division between us is very artificially heightened. But I wrote a Substack called Dear Conservatives, I Apologize, because I did realize that a lot of things I believed were true are not true. I believed in, the Russia hoax. I believed that President Trump lied all the time. And then, I was shown that things I thought he lied about all the time, he hadn't been lying about, or things were taken totally out of context. I believed that January 6th was a simple insurrection, if not an armed riot, right? I didn't understand the complexity of it. So much I believed. I believed that, I believed MAGA were fanatical white Christian supremacists. And that turns out to be largely untrue as well. I thought the conservative right was racist and sexist. And, the opposite is true. It turns out that the racism and sexism is mostly coming from the left these days. And the conservatives I meet just want an America where people are united and see each other as humans first. What a shocking approach. So I believed a lot of things that were not true, and I'm sorry, but I hope that with this election and with RFK Jr. joining forces with Trump, that we're heading into a time where we really can heal these divisions and kind of come out of this divide and conquer era that's so good for our enemies and so bad for our country.
Yeah, we all hope so. And thank you so much for taking time, and thank you for the incredible research. Good grief! If you wanna get the Pfizer Papers, Naomi, what's the best way to get it?
Thank you. Please go to Amazon and order it from Amazon. I'm going to hold it up again so you see what a beautiful book it is.
Man, that's a big book.
Yeah.
It's big. And please buy copies for your loved ones if they're still in denial, and extras for your hospital and your doctor. And we will get the truth out. Thank you.
So important for us to have it. The Pfizer Papers, Naomi Wolf, and dailyclout.io. This is so important to educate ourselves, because sadly, I think we've lost trust sometimes in those that we thought we could trust without questioning. Those days are over. So, Naomi, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Take care.
Well, Bubba, I know these are things that you and I have talked about. I don't feel any better about it.
No, but it was, I thought, very eye-opening to hear someone who has been by her own definition, a liberal. She's worked with a lot of Democratic candidates, president, for her to say the things she said. So, that gives me hope that America can heal, and that our social media hasn't divided us too far yet.
Well, and I love the advice. She said, the reason I changed my worldview is I simply began to research and find out if the things I kept hearing about those that I thought had the opposing point of view, whether these things are actually true or not.
Right.
And then researching for herself and her organization, the Pfizer Papers. So Pfizer Papers, you can get the Pfizer Papers on Amazon. Naomi Wolf is, of course, the author, and we thank her and all of you for joining us on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast.